"There's a boy at my door. He says his stepdad just shot his mom. Don't shoot me! Don't shoot me!" December 22nd, 2025, Florida. A man shoots his wife dead under the Christmas tree, then walks to his stepdaughter's bedroom and shoots her twice in the face. The reason? He wanted to watch a football game. The girl survived. This is how. Her name was Kenney. Friends described her as fiercely protective, the kind of mother who would die for her kids. On December 22nd, she did. Crystal lived in Highland City, Florida, a quiet community 50 miles from Orlando, the kind of place where neighbors compete for the best Christmas lights display, where families wave to each other from their driveways, where nothing bad is supposed to happen. She had 3 children, a 13-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, and a 1-year-old baby girl with her husband, Jason Kenney. Jason was 47 years old, stepfather to Crystal's older kids, biological father to their youngest. And he was spiraling. Days before her murder, Crystal wrote Jason a note. Police would find it later at the crime scene, tucked away like a desperate prayer that went unanswered. It read, "You're drinking. You're using cocaine again. This is not the way the family should be. You need God." Think about that for a moment. Crystal knew her husband was falling apart. She saw the warning signs, the late nights in the shed, the slurred words, the paranoia that comes with cocaine use, the mood swings that come with addiction. She didn't ignore it. She didn't make excuses. She confronted it head-on with that note, trying to pull him back from the edge before it was too late. But to everyone else, to the neighbors who saw them at the grocery store, to the people who passed their house with its cheerful Christmas decorations, Jason seemed normal. There was no criminal record, no history of police calls to their home, 0 domestic violence arrests on file. This is one of the most terrifying aspects of domestic violence. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always leave visible bruises or result in loud arguments that neighbors can hear. Sometimes it happens behind closed doors, hidden behind holiday decorations and forced smiles, invisible to everyone except the person living through it. The holiday season gave Jason the perfect cover. Heavy drinking in December? That's just holiday cheer, right? Everyone drinks a little more during the holidays. Nobody questions the man who's celebrating with his 3rd or 4th beer while watching football. Nobody sees the danger until it's too late. But Crystal saw it. She knew the truth. She set boundaries. She wrote the note. She tried to save him, to save their family, to protect her children from what was coming. And on December 22nd, 2025, those boundaries got her killed. The night everything went wrong. Monday, December 22nd, 2025. Week 16 of the NFL season. The San Francisco 49ers were playing the Indianapolis Colts on Monday Night Football, a game that, for most people, would be nothing more than entertainment, a way to unwind after a long day, something to discuss at work the next morning. For the Kenney family, it would become the trigger for a massacre. Jason had been at his shed for hours, a separate structure on their property that served as his personal space, his refuge, his place to escape from family responsibilities. According to investigators, he'd been out there drinking heavily and using cocaine while watching the game. Hour after hour, the alcohol and cocaine mixed in his system, creating a toxic chemical called cocaethylene, a compound that produces intense euphoria, but also extreme aggression, paranoia, and catastrophic loss of impulse control. Around 11 p.m. near the end of the game, Jason decided to come inside. He wanted to finish watching on the main television in the living room where his family was gathered. Crystal said no. Here's what you need to understand about that moment, because it's the key to understanding everything that came after. This wasn't really about football. This wasn't about one team versus another, or about playoff implications, or about who was winning or losing on the screen. Domestic violence experts will tell you the trigger is never the real cause. It's the excuse. It's the match that lights the fuse. But the bomb was already built, already primed, already waiting for any reason to explode. A football game, a late dinner, a perceived slight, talking back, forgetting to pick something up from the store. It doesn't matter. What matters is power, control, and the abuser's fundamental belief that no is unacceptable, that their will must always prevail, that any challenge to their authority justifies violence. In Jason's cocaine and alcohol-soaked mind, Crystal wasn't just refusing to change the channel. She was challenging his authority, his dominance, his right to do whatever he wanted in his own home. She was, in his distorted perception, disrespecting him, emasculating him, treating him like he didn't matter, and he couldn't tolerate that. The argument escalated fast. Voices raised. Words became threats. The air in that living room became electric with danger, with the sense that something terrible was about to happen. Crystal recognized it. She'd lived with Jason long enough to know when the situation was becoming lethal. She'd seen this escalation before, felt this particular kind of fear before. And in that moment, she made a decision that would save at least one of her children's lives. She turned to her 12-year-old son and gave him a direct, urgent command. "Go call 911. The boy didn't hesitate. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to intervene or calm his stepfather down. He ran, out the door, across the yard, through the darkness toward the neighbor's house, his heart pounding, his breath coming in gasps, knowing that something unspeakable was happening behind him, but following his mother's final instruction. As he ran, he heard it. One shot. A single gunshot that echoed through the quiet Florida neighborhood, shattering the peaceful night, announcing that something terrible had just occurred in the house with the Christmas decorations. Jason Kenney had just executed his wife with a bullet to the head. She died instantly in the living room, right there beneath the Christmas tree she'd decorated with care, surrounded by the presents she'd wrapped for her children, presents that would never be opened, a Christmas morning that would never come. But Jason wasn't finished. He walked down the hallway to the bedroom where his 13-year-old stepdaughter was sleeping, his footsteps deliberate, his gun still in his hand, his mind made up about what came next. She woke up to see her stepfather standing in her doorway, the man who was supposed to protect her, the man who'd been part of her life, part of her family, and he was holding a gun, and it was pointed at her. She begged for her life. "Don't shoot me! Don't shoot me!" Those words, full of terror, full of desperation, full of the primal human instinct to survive, had no effect on Jason Kenney. He fired twice. The first bullet hit her shoulder, a disabling shot, likely meant for preventing her from running or fighting back. The second bullet entered through the bridge of her nose and exited through the top of her skull. She should have died instantly. By every medical probability, by every law of anatomy and physics, that bullet should have destroyed the structures in her brain that keep a human being alive. But somehow, miraculously, impossibly, the bullet traveled through her facial sinuses, the hollow spaces around the nose, and missed every vital structure. It missed the brainstem that controls breathing and heartbeat. It missed the motor cortex that controls movement. It missed the major arteries that supply blood to the brain. Neurosurgeons would later describe the trajectory as millimeters from death. A few degrees to the left and she's dead. A few degrees to the right and she's dead. Slightly lower and it severs the brainstem. Slightly higher and it causes catastrophic bleeding. But somehow, the bullet found the only path through her skull that wasn't instantly lethal. Sheriff Grady Judd would later call it a Christmas miracle. Doctors would call it statistically impossible. But in that moment, lying in her bedroom with blood pouring from her face, the 13-year-old girl somehow remained conscious. Meanwhile, the 12-year-old boy had reached the neighbor's house, pounding on the door, screaming for help, begging them to call 911. The neighbor grabbed their phone immediately, reporting what the terrified boy was telling them. There had been shooting. His mother was hurt. His sister was hurt. They needed help now. Deputies were dispatched at 11:08 p.m. They arrived within minutes, their lights flashing, their sirens cutting through the night, racing against time to save whoever might still be saved. When they entered the Kenney home, they found a scene of horrific contradiction that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. Christmas lights were still glowing, casting their warm, cheerful colors across the walls. Presents were still wrapped under the tree, name tags carefully written, ribbons perfectly tied. The stockings were still hung. The decorations were still in place. Everything looked like it should for a family preparing to celebrate Christmas together. Except for the blood and the body in the living room. Crystal Kenney lay dead, her life stolen in an instant, killed by the man who'd promised to love her. In the bedroom, her 13-year-old daughter was critically wounded, but somehow, impossibly, still alive, still alert, still able to speak to the deputies who found her, to tell them what happened, to give her mother's story a voice. And in a crib nearby, untouched by the violence, sleeping peacefully through the chaos, was the 1-year-old baby girl, Jason and Crystal's biological daughter, completely unharmed. Jason hadn't touched her. He'd killed his wife. He'd shot his stepdaughter twice in the face. But his biological daughter? He'd left her sleeping peacefully, as if she existed in a different reality, as if the violence he'd inflicted on everyone else somehow didn't apply to her. Forensic psychologists have a name for this pattern. They call it the Cinderella effect, a documented phenomenon showing that stepchildren face significantly higher risk of abuse and violence than biological children. It's a dark manifestation of evolutionary psychology, a primitive tribal instinct that sees genetic offspring as worthy of protection, while viewing stepchildren as competitors for resources, as outsiders, as expendable. Jason's violence wasn't random. It wasn't the result of him losing control or snapping in a moment of rage. It was selective, calculated. He knew exactly who he wanted to hurt and who he wanted to spare. That tells us something important about the nature of his violence. It wasn't about losing control. It was about asserting it. But Jason himself was gone. He'd fled the scene in his truck while deputies were still being dispatched, while his stepdaughter was still bleeding, while his infant daughter was still sleeping in her crib. He'd left them all behind to face the consequences of what he'd done. The manhunt and confession. As paramedics rushed the 13-year-old girl to the hospital, working frantically to stabilize her, to stop the bleeding, to save her life, deputies immediately launched a manhunt for Jason Kenney. They knew they were looking for an armed man who had just killed his wife and attempted to kill his stepdaughter. They knew he was dangerous, unpredictable, and likely still under the influence of drugs and alcohol. They knew that every minute he remained free was a minute he could hurt someone else or escape their jurisdiction entirely. But they didn't have to search for long. At 11:15 p.m., just minutes after fleeing the scene, Jason made a phone call to his sister who lived in New York. In that call, according to investigators, he made a confession that would become crucial evidence in the case. "I did something very, very bad," he told her. "I'm not going to jail. You'll see it on the news." That call told investigators everything they needed to know. Jason wasn't running to Mexico or trying to disappear into another state. He wasn't planning to turn himself in. He was preparing to die. He'd made his decision. He would take his own life rather than face arrest, trial, and imprisonment for what he'd done. Using cell phone tracking and their knowledge of Jason's personal history, deputies quickly identified where he would go: his deceased father's property in Lake Wales, Florida, about 20 miles from the crime scene. It was a place with emotional significance, a place where Jason had history, a place where he'd likely feel comfortable making his final stand. When deputies arrived at the property shortly after midnight, they found Jason's truck parked outside a shed. They surrounded the structure carefully, weapons drawn, calling out for him to surrender, giving him every opportunity to give himself up peacefully. Then they heard it. A single muffled gunshot from inside the shed. Deputies breached the door immediately, hoping against hope that they'd misheard, that there was still time to save him, to bring him to justice in a courtroom rather than a morgue. But Jason Kenney was dead. Self-inflicted gunshot wound. He'd taken his own life rather than face what he'd done, rather than look Crystal's family in the eye, rather than spend decades in prison thinking about the life he'd destroyed and the children he'd traumatized. Some might see his suicide as an act of cowardice. Others might see it as a final act of control, denying the justice system the satisfaction of convicting him, denying Crystal's family the opportunity to confront him in court. Either way, it meant that Jason Kenney would never have to answer for his crimes in any earthly courtroom, would never have to sit through a trial and hear victim impact statements, would never have to face the full weight of what he'd done. The next day, Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, a no-nonsense lawman known for his blunt, direct communication style, held a press conference to address the community and the media. His words were harsh but honest, reflecting the rage and grief that many people felt upon hearing the details of this case. This is a monster who decided that because he couldn't watch a football game, he was going to destroy his family, Judd said, his voice heavy with disgust. The only thing he did right that night was shoot himself. It was a stark, brutal assessment, but one that captured the senselessness of what had occurred. A woman was dead, a child was critically wounded, a baby was orphaned, an entire family was devastated. And for what? Because a man couldn't watch the end of a football game on the TV he wanted? But Sheriff Judd also took the opportunity to address something else, something that the investigation had revealed about the history of this family. He spoke directly about Crystal's note, about her desperate attempt to save her husband from himself, about the warning signs that had been there but perhaps not fully recognized for what they were. If you're living with someone who's drinking, using drugs, being violent, get out. Get help. Don't wait until it's too late like Crystal did, Judd urged, speaking not just to the cameras, but to anyone watching who might be living in a similar situation, who might be making excuses for someone's behavior, who might be hoping that love and patience would be enough to change an abuser. It was a message that needed to be heard, a warning that needed to be repeated, because Crystal Kenney's story is not unique. Every year, thousands of women in the United States are killed by current or former intimate partners. Every year, families are destroyed by domestic violence that escalated beyond anyone's ability to control it. Every year, people die because they stayed too long, hoped too much, believed too deeply that things would get better. At the hospital, doctors and surgeons were fighting to save the 13-year-old girl's life. The gunshot wound to her face was catastrophic. There's no other word for it. A bullet had entered through the bridge of her nose and exited through the top of her skull, creating a channel of destruction through one of the most complex and delicate structures in the human body, the brain. Under normal circumstances, this injury would be instantly fatal. The human brain doesn't have much room for error. It's packed tightly into the skull, with every millimeter serving a critical function. The slightest damage to the wrong structure can result in death, paralysis, loss of cognitive function, or permanent disability. But this girl's injury, while horrific, was also incredibly, miraculously survivable. The bullet had traveled through her facial sinuses, the hollow air-filled spaces that surround the nose and eyes. These spaces, which exist to lighten the skull and add resonance to the voice, essentially created a pathway for the bullet that avoided the most critical brain structures. The brainstem that controls breathing, heartbeat, and other vital autonomic functions missed by millimeters. The motor cortex that controls voluntary movement, untouched. The major arteries that supply blood to the brain, the anterior cerebral artery, the middle cerebral artery, the basilar artery, all spared. Neurosurgeons who reviewed the case later would describe it as millimeters from death. They would show colleagues the imaging, the trajectory, the path the bullet took, and they would marvel at the infinitesimally small margin between life and death that this girl had navigated. A few degrees to the left, and the bullet severs the carotid artery. She bleeds out in minutes. A few degrees to the right, and it destroys the motor cortex. She's paralyzed for life if she survives at all. Slightly lower, and it causes catastrophic bleeding in the frontal lobes, likely fatal or resulting in severe permanent brain damage. But somehow, by chance, by fate, by divine intervention depending on your beliefs, the bullet found the only path through her skull that wasn't instantly or permanently lethal. Sheriff Judd called it a Christmas miracle. Doctors called it statistically impossible. The girl's family called it an answered prayer. Whatever you choose to call it, the fact remains, she survived. She underwent emergency surgery. Neurosurgeons worked for hours to repair the damage, to control the bleeding, to preserve as much function as possible. Her condition was listed as critical but stable, which in medical terms means she was out of immediate danger but still faced a long and uncertain recovery. And incredibly, testament to both her physical resilience and the remarkable path that bullet had taken, she was alert enough, conscious enough, aware enough to give a statement to deputies while still in the hospital. She confirmed everything. She told them her stepfather had shot her mother. She told them he had then come to her room. She told them she had begged him not to shoot her. She told them he had shot her anyway, twice. Her testimony was crucial, not for prosecuting Jason, who was already dead, but for understanding what had happened in those final moments, for documenting the truth, for giving Crystal's story a voice, because Crystal herself could no longer speak. This brave young girl, with a bullet wound through her face, still had the strength and the courage to make sure that what had happened to her and her mother was recorded, documented, made part of the official record, so that people would know, so that Crystal wouldn't be forgotten, so that the truth wouldn't be buried with her mother. As investigators processed all the evidence and built their understanding of what had occurred that night, they also received toxicology results on Jason Kenney's body. The results confirmed what Crystal's note had predicted, what the family had feared. Jason had both alcohol and cocaine in his system at the time of his death. When you combine these two substances, something particularly dangerous happens in the body. The liver metabolizes them together and creates a compound called cocaethylene, a substance that produces more intense euphoria than either drug alone, but also significantly increases aggression, impulsivity, and violent behavior. Studies have shown that people under the influence of cocaethylene are far more likely to engage in violent acts than people using either alcohol or cocaine alone. The combination essentially removes the brain's normal inhibitions while simultaneously amplifying feelings of anger, paranoia, and the need to dominate. In Jason's distorted mental state, cocaine making him paranoid and aggressive, alcohol removing his inhibitions, cocaethylene turbocharging both effects, Crystal's simple refusal to let him watch television in the living room wasn't just annoying or frustrating. It was perceived as a direct threat to his dominance, an unacceptable challenge to his authority, an insult that demanded a violent response. His brain, flooded with these chemicals, couldn't process the situation rationally, couldn't see that this was his wife, the mother of his child, the woman he'd promised to love and protect, couldn't recognize that shooting her would destroy his family, traumatize his children, and end his own life. All he could see in that moment was disrespect, challenge, defiance that needed to be punished. And in his mind, twisted by drugs and alcohol and his own inability to control his rage, that justified murder. Where are they now? Today, nearly 5 days after that terrible night, the 3 surviving children are being raised by their grandparents. Crystal's parents have taken on the responsibility of raising her children, of trying to help them heal from trauma that no child should ever have to experience, of keeping Crystal's memory alive while also helping these kids build new lives out of the rubble of the old ones. The 13-year-old survivor has undergone multiple reconstructive surgeries. The bullet's path through her face left significant damage that required extensive repair. Bone grafts, soft tissue reconstruction, dental work, procedures that will likely continue for years. She's working with therapists too, both for the physical rehabilitation her injuries require and for the psychological trauma of watching her mother be murdered and then being shot herself by her stepfather. The physical wounds are healing, slowly but steadily. The scars will always be there, visible reminders of what she survived, of the night her family was destroyed. But doctors are hopeful that with continued treatment, she'll regain most of her function, that she'll be able to live a relatively normal life despite the severity of her injuries. The psychological wounds will take much longer. Post-traumatic stress disorder is almost certain. Survivor's guilt, wondering why she lived when her mother died. Trust issues with men, with authority figures, with anyone who's supposed to protect her. Nightmares, flashbacks, the sound of a door opening making her flinch, wondering if someone is coming to hurt her again. These are wounds that don't show up on X-rays or CT scans. They're the invisible injuries that will shape the rest of her life, that will affect her relationships, her career choices, her ability to feel safe in the world. But with good therapy, with family support, with time and healing, there's hope that she can build a life that's more than just survival, that's actually worth living. The 12-year-old boy who ran for help carries his own burden. He's the one who followed his mother's final instruction. He's the one who ran through the darkness to the neighbor's house while his mother was being murdered behind him. He's the one who heard that single gunshot and knew, even before anyone confirmed it, that his mother was gone. Therapists working with him have focused on one crucial message. He didn't abandon his mother. He didn't run away like a coward. He followed her final instruction, and in doing so, he saved his sister's life. If he hadn't gotten to that neighbor, if the 911 call had come even 5 minutes later, his sister would have bled out before paramedics arrived. His actions, his mother's final sacrifice in sending him away, meant that at least one of her children survived. That distinction between running away in fear and running for help because your mother told you to is critical for his healing. It's the difference between carrying guilt for the rest of his life and understanding that he did exactly what his mother needed him to do in that moment. The 1-year-old daughter, Jason and Crystal's biological child, is too young to remember that night. She'll grow up with no memory of her mother beyond photographs and stories, no memory of her father except as a monster in family history. She was found sleeping peacefully in her crib, untouched by the violence, protected by some instinct in Jason that spared his genetic offspring, even while he murdered and attempted to murder his stepchildren. She'll grow up surrounded by family who love her, protected by grandparents who will make sure she knows she's valued, that what her father did wasn't her fault, that she deserves happiness despite the circumstances of her birth and the tragedy that orphaned her. But eventually, when she's old enough, when the family decides the time is right, she'll have to learn the truth. She'll have to learn that her mother died trying to protect the family. She'll have to learn that her father destroyed that family. She'll have to reconcile the fact that she was spared because of an evolutionary quirk in her father's broken brain that valued genetic offspring over stepchildren. That's a burden no child should have to carry, but it's one she'll bear for the rest of her life. The Highland City community rallied around these children in the aftermath of the tragedy. Fundraisers were organized to help cover the survivors' medical expenses, which were substantial and ongoing. Vigils were held to honor Crystal's memory. Support groups were formed for family members dealing with the trauma. And perhaps most significantly, domestic violence organizations in the area reported a substantial spike in calls to their hotlines in the weeks and months following the shooting. Crystal's story, as tragic as it was, gave other women the courage to recognize their own dangerous situations, to reach out for help before it was too late for them too. The Polk County Sheriff's Office expanded its domestic violence prevention programs, using Crystal's case as a teaching tool for deputies responding to domestic calls, helping them recognize the warning signs of escalating violence, encouraging them to take every call seriously, even when there's no visible injury, no prior history, no paper trail of abuse. Because that's what haunts investigators about this case more than anything else. There were no prior police calls to the Kenney home, no documented history of domestic violence, no arrests, no restraining orders, no official red flags that would have alerted the system that this family was in danger. Crystal saw the danger. She wrote the note. She tried to intervene, to save her husband from himself, to protect her children while still holding her family together. But she did it alone, behind closed doors, in the privacy of her home, where abusers thrive and victims suffer in silence. And it cost her everything. The truth about triggers. In the days and weeks after the shooting, media coverage of the case focused heavily on one particular detail: the football game. Headlines screamed "Man kills wife over football game" and "Deadly argument over Monday Night Football" and "NFL game leads to murder." But that framing, while technically accurate, misses the larger truth about what really happened that night. This wasn't about football. This wasn't about one team versus another, about playoff implications or rivalry games, or whose favorite team was winning or losing on the television screen. Domestic violence experts across the country spoke out to correct this misunderstanding, to make sure people understood what they were really seeing in this case. The trigger is never the real cause. A football game, a late dinner, a perceived slight, forgetting an errand, making a joke at the wrong time, wearing the wrong outfit, looking at someone the wrong way, having an opinion, setting a boundary, saying no. It doesn't matter what the excuse is, because the excuse isn't the point. The point is power, control, and the abuser's fundamental belief that they have the right to dominate their partner, that any challenge to their will is unacceptable, that violence is a legitimate response to not getting their way. When Jason Kenney killed Crystal over a TV remote, he wasn't acting out of passion for the 49ers or the Colts. He wasn't so emotionally invested in the game that her refusal to change the channel drove him to temporary insanity. He was asserting control. He was punishing her for the audacity of saying no to him, for setting a boundary, for daring to suggest that her preferences mattered as much as his. If it hadn't been the football game, it would have been something else, tomorrow or next week or next month. Some other trivial trigger would have set him off, because the problem wasn't the trigger. It was Jason himself, his need for absolute dominance, his inability to accept his wife as an equal partner rather than a subordinate who existed to serve his needs. And here's the uncomfortable truth that we need to talk about, that we need to keep talking about until it sinks into our collective consciousness. The holiday season, the time we associate with peace and family togetherness and goodwill toward all, is actually one of the most dangerous times of the year for domestic violence victims. Studies consistently show that reported incidents of domestic violence increase by 8 to 12% during the holiday season. Emergency room visits related to domestic violence spike. Calls to domestic violence hotlines increase. Shelters fill to capacity. Why? Because the holidays bring pressures that abusive relationships can't withstand. Financial stress, the expectation to buy gifts, to host meals, to travel, to participate in expensive traditions when money is already tight. That stress gets taken out on the partner who's seen as causing the financial problems, or not managing money well enough, or spending too much. Forced family gatherings, time spent with in-laws or extended family who might see through the facade of the happy couple, who might ask questions about bruises or mood changes, who might notice that something is wrong. That creates anxiety for the abuser, who then punishes their partner for making them feel exposed. Increased alcohol consumption, parties, celebrations, traditions that involve drinking. Alcohol lowers inhibitions, amplifies existing anger and resentment, makes violence more likely and more severe when it occurs. The expectation of the perfect Christmas, the cultural narrative that tells us the holidays should be magical, that families should be happy, that everything should be beautiful and peaceful. When reality doesn't match that expectation, when the turkey burns, or the kids fight, or the decorations aren't perfect, the abuser blames their partner and responds with violence. For families already in crisis, for relationships already teetering on the edge, the holidays don't bring joy. They bring pressure. They bring stress. They bring demands that can't be met and expectations that can't be fulfilled. And sometimes, too often, that pressure explodes into violence. Crystal Kenney understood this, consciously or unconsciously. She decorated her home for Christmas despite the tension in her marriage. She wrapped presents for her children despite knowing her husband was spiraling back into drug use. She tried to create the perfect holiday for her kids, to maintain normalcy, to pretend everything was okay as she wrote that desperate note pleading with Jason to get help. And 3 days before Christmas, she was murdered beneath the tree she'd decorated, surrounded by the presents she'd wrapped, in the home she'd tried so hard to make festive and safe for her children. The presents were never opened. The Christmas morning she'd planned never came. The future she'd hoped for, where Jason got help, got clean, became the partner and father she needed him to be, died with her. As of today, the 13-year-old survivor continues her recovery. She's back in school, though accommodations have been made for her medical appointments and therapy sessions. She's surrounded by family who love her and support her. She's working with talented therapists who specialize in childhood trauma. And despite everything she's been through, despite watching her mother be murdered, despite being shot in the face by her stepfather, despite the surgeries and the scars and the nightmares, she's alive. She survived. She's building a future that Jason Kenney tried to take from her. Her brother is being called a hero by the community, the boy who ran for help through the darkness, who followed his mother's final instruction, who saved his sister's life by getting emergency services there in time. He's in therapy too, learning to process the trauma, learning to understand that he did exactly what his mother needed him to do. Their baby sister is growing up loved and protected, surrounded by grandparents and extended family who will make sure she knows her worth, that she understands she's not responsible for her father's actions, that she deserves every good thing life has to offer, despite the tragedy that began her story. And Crystal Kenney's memory lives on through all of them, through the children she died trying to protect, through the community that rallied around her family, through the women who found courage in her story to leave their own dangerous situations before it was too late. The criminal case is closed in the legal sense. Jason Kenney's suicide ended any possibility of a trial, any chance for Crystal's family to confront him in court, any opportunity for a jury to hold him accountable. There will be no victim impact statements read aloud in a courtroom. No judge will sentence him for his crimes. No appeals process will drag the family through years of legal proceedings. In some ways, that's a mercy. The case is over, and the family can try to heal without the constant reopening of wounds that a trial would bring. In other ways, it's deeply unsatisfying, a denial of justice, a feeling that Jason took the coward's way out and escaped the full consequences of what he'd done. But the questions his case raises remain, questions that extend far beyond one family's tragedy. How many other families are living in similar danger right now? How many other women are hiding abuse behind cheerful social media posts and holiday decorations? How many other children are growing up in homes where violence simmers beneath the surface, waiting for the right trigger to explode? How many Crystal Kenneys are out there right now, writing notes to partners who won't listen, setting boundaries that will be violently crossed, hoping that love will be enough to change someone who doesn't want to change? If you're watching this and you're scared, if you're living with someone who drinks too much, uses drugs, gets violent, makes you feel unsafe, controls your money or your time or your choices, please hear this. It's not about a football game. It's not about the dishes or the kids or the money or any of the excuses your abuser gives for their behavior. It's about control. It's about power. It's about someone who believes they have the right to dominate you, to hurt you, to make you live in fear. And it will escalate. What starts as controlling behavior becomes verbal abuse, becomes physical violence, becomes, in the worst cases, murder. The pattern is documented, studied, proven across thousands of cases. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. You deserve a life where you're not walking on eggshells, where you're not afraid of setting off your partner's rage, where you're not making excuses for bruises or threats or destroyed property. There are resources available right now, shelters that will take you in, hotlines staffed 24/7 with people who understand what you're going through, legal advocates who can help you navigate restraining orders and custody battles, therapists who specialize in helping survivors rebuild their lives. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. It's free. It's confidential. You can call or text. They won't judge you. They won't pressure you. They'll listen and they'll help you figure out your next step, whatever that needs to be. Because here's what Crystal Kenney's story teaches us, what her death demands we understand. Leaving is dangerous, but staying can be fatal. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when the victim tries to leave. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't leave. It means you need to leave safely, with a plan, with support, with people who can protect you through the transition. Crystal tried to handle it alone. She wrote the note, she set the boundary, she confronted Jason's addiction behind closed doors, trying to save her marriage, trying to keep her family intact. And it cost her everything. Don't be Crystal. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't believe that love will fix what's broken in your partner. Don't sacrifice yourself on the altar of keeping the family together. Your children need you alive more than they need an intact family. Your children need to see you choosing safety over staying. Your children need to learn that nobody, not a parent, not a spouse, not anyone, has the right to hurt you, to control you, to make you live in fear. 3 days after Jason Kenney murdered his wife and attempted to murder his stepdaughter, families across America woke up on Christmas morning. They opened presents, they ate together, they laughed and argued over trivial things and made memories that would last a lifetime. The Kenney children woke up in their grandparents' home. No mother, no father, no Christmas morning in the house where they'd grown up. Just the echo of gunshots, the memory of blood on the floor, the empty space where Crystal should have been. Those presents under the tree, the ones Crystal wrapped with care, the ones she bought hoping to give her children a magical Christmas, were never opened. They became evidence, tagged, photographed, cataloged by homicide detectives who had to process a crime scene instead of celebrating with their own families. That's what domestic violence takes from us. Not just the victim, not just the immediate family. It ripples outward. Grandparents forced to bury their daughter and raise traumatized grandchildren. First responders haunted by crime scenes they can't unsee. Communities shattered by violence that everyone missed. Neighbors who replay every interaction, wondering if they could have done something different.